Tottenham sacked Thomas Frank just over a week ago, and it's safe to say right now the Spurs job might officially be the most dangerous in English football.
I'm not talking smaller clubs or lower divisions. For a top club in England, the stint that he had at the club is for me one of the most embarrassing, from being humiliated publicly by Van der Ven and Jet Spence after that game where he asked them to go and clap the fans and they didn't even look at him, to the Arsenal Cup in that away game at Bournemouth, to obviously the bad results that we've seen. I mean, over the last 10 league games, I think they've taken as many points as Wolves.
Thomas Frank lasted just 8 months as Spurs coach after taking over in the summer. In the broader context of the club, he's now the 9th different manager the club has had in 7 years. From Jose Mourinho to Antonio Conte to Nuno Espirito Santo, different names, experience, youth and a calm head in between, all have tried and failed. They'll have a 9th manager soon in Igor Tudor, at least on an interim or permanent basis. But this is more than just a blip for Spurs, it's a full-blown crisis.
Spurs have created nothing of note, and they're staring down the barrel on home turf again.
Managing Spurs right now is more than just dangerous. It's a death wish, a suicide mission. Why? Because it rarely ever works out. The Spurs board hoped they would with Thomas Frank. Hoped he'd have been the right man. At least that's what Thomas Frank himself thought, even in the hours leading up to his sacking.
How convinced are you within yourself that you are the right man? Is there any doubt whatsoever? Do you still have that belief within you?
1000% sure. I'm also 1000% sure that I never expected us to be in a situation like this.
But the fact remains that Thomas Frank's appointment as Spurs manager was in fact a big gamble. He lasted just 8 months at the club. He leaves the club in 18th, just 4 points off 18th place West Ham, with all games left to play as of recording this. With a 26.9% win rate in the league, he's statistically the worst manager in Premier League history for Spurs. But was all of this really down to Thomas Frank being a bad manager? The truth is no. There's a reason Spurs paid £6.7 million to Brentford just to get Thomas Frank's appointment as head coach over the line. He turned Brentford from Premier League debutants in 2021 to league mainstays in 2025 before he left. In 4 years, he'd overseen the likes of Brian and Mbeumo and Johan Visser's rise in the league, taking Brentford to 13th, 9th, 16th and 10th in the league in his 4 seasons in charge. That's 3 out of those 4 seasons where he didn't have the Bees battling relegation. All of this is proof that Spurs really thought they had a stable solution. A man who they felt was proven enough to make the club stable contenders in the league again, and then push from there to the European stage. Instead, what happened next was a combination of unfortunate events. As of recording this, Spurs haven't won a league game in 2026. We're midway through February. Even worse is the injury or absentee list at the club. The likes of James Maddison and Dejan Kulusevski aren't even sure of playing again this season. Mohamed Kudus and Richarlison are out with hamstring problems. The same with Pedro Porro and Destiny Udogie. Lucas Bergvall and Rodrigo Bentancur are also out injured. Club captain Christian Romero is out suspended after his red card against Manchester United. The fact is that almost his entire tenure when Thomas Frank needed key players are unavailable. It stretches beyond just the injuries too. It's a Spurs team under Thomas Frank that looked out of their depth, trying to juggle multiple competitions this season. It's probably the most Spurs thing to happen in recent years. Appoint a manager who they believed could turn the league fortunes of the club around and have him debut in the Champions League with a relatively inexperienced squad, and yet strangely enough, they did perform in Europe. That's how the league phase ended for Spurs. Despite being awful in the Premier League, they lost just once in the group stage, a 5-3 defeat to the defending champions Paris Saint-Germain. They beat the likes of Villarreal, Slavia Prague, Borussia Dortmund, Eintracht Frankfurt and FC Copenhagen to finish with 5 wins, 2 draws and just the 1 defeat in the Champions League group stage this season. So what really did it for Thomas Frank then? Well, the injuries were one thing, but the other felt like it had to do with the man and the job itself.
Talk to me about Thomas, because I know you know Thomas well, and you've had a relationship with him over the years, and you speak to him now and then. Is this as simple as this job being too big? Is this the wrong move for Thomas Frank, who's no doubt an astute, smart coach?
Yeah.
But it hasn't worked in 6 months, Dan. I don't quite know what Thomas Frank's Spurs are gonna look like.
See, now this is a huge claim, but there's some degree of truth in it. Was the Spurs job actually too big for Thomas Frank? To be honest, it swings both ways. But just before we get into what the second way is, at the Football Armageddon, we post football deep dives into players and managers, and in turn, just ask for you to hit that subscribe button down below to the channel. Thanks. As was mentioned earlier, Thomas Frank walked into this one off the back of an incredible reputation at Brentford.
Against those teams, could you explain maybe the differences in coming against them? Because the two top teams, but probably slightly different styles. Do you have to play differently against either of them because of that?
We do the same in principle, but we know, let's say, I think we all know that Liverpool play with more crosses. They play a little bit more in behind, so that we are more aware of. City, more the time, want more passes, want more to control the ball.
It was interviews like this that made him famous, displaying his ability to know how to play against the big teams and the rest of the league. It didn't happen during his ill-fated tenure with the Lily Whites. For one, his Spurs team looked almost unrecognizable. They lacked a clear identity. Thomas Frank couldn't get Spurs to play in the shape. He went from playing the back five against an Arsenal team that dismantled them at the Emirates to defeats at home to the likes of Chelsea and Liverpool. At best, they looked pragmatic. When it got bad, it got really bad. The fans turning on him were a clear indicator, an almost surprising one too, considering what he was at Brentford. Genuinely speaking, he was one of the most lovable characters in the league, an all-round nice guy. So how did he go from that to falling out of the club so fast then? Well, the style of play was bad, but there's also the fact that he never felt like Thomas Frank had fully taken charge of that Spurs dressing room. This was the most obvious example. Thomas Frank was clearly blanked by Jet Spence and Mickey van den Ven after the defeat to Chelsea. He wanted them to applaud the fans. They didn't just ignore him, they went straight down to the tunnel. You just feel like in cases like this, a manager with a more stern approach would have made more out of this. Instead, Thomas Frank tried to play it down.
Mickey and Jet came into my office yesterday on prompt, just said, I want to say sorry for the situation. They didn't want it to look bad or disrespectful or all kind of perception you can get in this beautiful media world. So that was not the intention at all towards me or the team or the club.
Even when he was clearly disrespected, he still had a smile on his face. Tried to make it seem like nothing major had happened. In the grand context of his role as manager, that was a damning blow. Then the other issues followed, from handling the Yves Bissouma issue to Christian Romero's repeated attitude. Even when the Spurs captain clearly crossed the line with his statements about the club, Thomas Frank chose to back him. When Thomas Frank wasn't trying to look nice, he sometimes looked out of place. I mean, he couldn't really help him with situations like this, and yet it still didn't do him any good. From drinking from Spurs' fierce rivals' Arsenal-themed cup, again, trying to downplay it after the game, saying he didn't know.
Why are you drinking it out of an Arsenal cup? Why? Like, what is, I need to understand the logic of, okay, like, give me the logic and the understanding why you would be drinking out of an Arsenal cup.
Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he's just wants to make a cup of tea and hasn't looked at the
Well,
cup.
I don't know. I said that can't happen. You're not the manager of Tottenham Hotspur. You're drinking out of an Arsenal cup before kickoff. Are you joking?
It can't happen.
What do you mean?
Hence the nice guy tag. But as I mentioned earlier, it swings both ways. Yes, there were the issues on the part of Thomas Frank, but at the same time, Thomas Frank wasn't to blame alone. There's the part of the board. From day one, Thomas Frank walked into a setting where even the men at the top weren't exactly sure of what was going on. Daniel Levy left the club after 24 years as chairman last summer. Well, technically he didn't leave, more like stepped down. Sporting director Johan Lange, who was in charge of running the club on a day-to-day basis, was also the reason why Thomas Frank got the job in the first place, due to the fact that he had a 20-year friendship behind them. And as far as Thomas Frank's allies at the club went, that was it.
I said to you 2 months ago that he doesn't have any allies or support there, and so I fear that he won't be given the kind of backing and support that he might need.
He didn't really have that much in terms of support at the club. This then fell in line with arguably the biggest problem at Spurs.
You know, when you walk into Tottenham, what you see everywhere is to dare is to do. It's everywhere. And yet their actions are almost the antithesis of that. Right. Real curious in terms of understanding what are they trying to build? You know, what are they?
It's this. It's the fact that Spurs have the identity of a big club that ultimately stems from the board. Thomas Frank came into that team and, just like the men before him, had an ideal list of targets in the transfer window. They suffered a very vicious cycle. Morgan Gibbs-White. After reports of Spurs sealing a deal for him, the entire thing spectacularly changed with Gibbs-White himself dropping a suspicious video announcing his commitment to Nottingham Forest and owner Evangelos Marinakis.
I'm delighted, so thank you to Mr. Marinakis for believing in me. I feel like we've been on a roller coaster of a journey, but I've felt the love.
Eberechi Eze was another one. In fact, the Eze deal from Palace to Spurs was so close that Thomas Frank publicly spoke about it just days prior.
Eze. Very good player. He played.
Only for Eze to join North London rivals Arsenal. To add insult to injury, Eze's best performance came against Frank's Spurs team in the North London derby this season.
Well, we saw Eze bringing the ball home there. You know, that is his first hat-trick in senior football. The new recruit, the big money signing in his first North London derby, a hat-trick for Arsenal against Spurs.
They got beaten 4-1 in the North London derby with Eze scoring a hat-trick. In the end, it was a sad tale for Thomas Frank and Spurs in the transfer market. They had a list of big names, ideal names. They ended up getting what could have been described as alternate choices. Xavi Simons, Mohamed Kudus, Joao Palhinha, and Conor Gallagher. It's been a big problem for a long time now. Spurs appear to be a big club with a new stadium and what they look like commercially. The reality is that they cannot properly identify and execute targets in the transfer market, and Thomas Frank found out the hard way. It would have been particularly annoying, especially with the injuries Thomas Frank had to deal with. Just to get an idea of how bad it was, he spent 8 months at the club, and two of the biggest creative players he had in the team, James Maddison and Dejan Kulusevski, never played under him due to long-term injuries. Dominic Solanke only returned in his final weeks after an ankle injury. The likes of Richarlison and Mohamed Kudus are both, as of recording this, out injured. Then you piece it all together. Thomas Frank had to deal with a squad that needed strengthening, which ultimately never got strengthened. They again missed out on adding experience in the January transfer window after the deal for Liverpool's Andy Robertson somehow fell through. An injured squad with key players that weren't replaced, combined with a board that didn't seem to know how to identify the right players for the system, and all of it resulted in one epic fail. It then feels like Thomas Frank had to make do with what he had and try to grind results no matter what. It's why it felt like tactically Spurs had no identity, because they really didn't have an identity. I mean, think about it. The start to life under Thomas Frank was very impressive. They took the reigning European champions PSG to a shootout in the UEFA Super Cup opener, suffered just one defeat in their opening 10 matches in all competitions, a run that also included 5 clean sheets. But once again, the problem ultimately comes down to the squad they had. It wasn't big enough for what Thomas Frank was tasked to do, to compete in multiple competitions with a mediocre and depleted squad. One had to give. When Spurs looked different in Europe, they failed in the league. When the injuries hit, they struggled for form. Thomas Frank used to be a genius at Brentford. One of his biggest strengths was knowing how to utilize the squad back then, with different formations against different teams. He couldn't at Spurs because he had that many competitions with limited players to deal with. That's the deal with Thomas Frank. A nice guy who walked into a death trap. Was the job bigger than him? Yes, but not because he wasn't capable of managing Spurs. But the conditions he had to work with almost made it impossible. So what do you guys think? As stranger it might sound, did Thomas Frank need more time at Spurs? Was it the right decision to sack him? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to check out the previous video on why Ruben Amorim failed at Manchester United.